Have you ever heard of language deprivation? This is what happens to deaf children who grow up in environments where their families don't sign. This affects the vast majority of deaf children. Most people think that language deprivation only affects words and information. They think it's about vocabulary, reading level, or communication barriers. But what if I told you that language deprivation affects emotional development, relationship skills, identity, and even how we understand other people's minds? What if everything we call behavior problems or emotional immaturity in deaf adults is actually a wound of deprivation? Today we're going to go a little bit deeper, because if you're deaf, if you are a Coda, if you work in the deaf community, you deserve to know this. Language deprivation happens when a child grows up without full access to a natural and complete language, like ASL. Not partial access, not some gestures, and not we signed a little at home, but full access to a rich and accessible language. When access is missing during the brain's critical development window, the consequences are not just about communication. It becomes developmental trauma. Kids learn emotional regulation through conversations at the dinner table, through repair discussions between moms and dads and siblings, through being seen, through being understood, and through being soothed with healthy communication. Deaf children in non-signing homes almost never get that. So the deaf child grows up without emotional vocabulary, emotional regulation, conflict repair, perspective taking, and accountability without shame. This is how emotional immaturity can develop. Not because deaf people are immature, but because they were denied the tools to grow emotionally. Theory of mind is the ability to understand that other people think differently than you do, that they have their own beliefs, their own ideas, their own motives, and this ability develops through constant back and forth, communication, and attunement with other people. Deaf children who don't get early access to ASL, well, they miss the opportunity to practice these skills, to learn them even. And this is why some deaf adults may misread intentions or struggle with perspective taking, not because something is wrong with them, but because nobody ever gave them the chance to develop that part of the brain and use and understand these skills. So mentalization is even deeper. Mentalization is the ability to understand your own mind and someone else's mind at the same time, and how they work together. This is how we manage conflict, how we apologize, how we understand other people's motives, how we read emotion, and how we stay connected even when the relationship is stressed. Without early language, mentalization doesn't fully develop. So when I see a deaf adult in my office who reacts quickly, shuts down, avoids conflict, gets flooded, and struggles with accountability, I don't see a problem person. I see someone who grew up without the scaffolding, without the information, the foundation that they deserved. So here's where things can get a little dangerous. Many times deaf adults are often misdiagnosed with personality disorders, borderline personality disorder, oppositional traits, when in reality what we're seeing is developmental deprivation trauma, not personality pathology. This isn't narcissism, this is injury. This is how the brain and that individual reacts through a learned skill due to trauma. And Codas grow up inside of the consequences of language deprivation. A deaf parent may struggle with emotional regulation, with mentalization, or conflict repair, and the child struggles with being the emotional interpreter, the mediator, the peacemaker, or the fixer. And Codas can become adultified, parentified, over-responsible, hyper-aware, even conflict avoidant. It might look like overwhelm or shutdown. Well, they are shaped by the legacy burdens that their parents carried, and burdens that started long before either of them was ever born. Language deprivation wounds one generation, and then the next generation grows up compensating, trying to fix those wounds. And deaf parents and coded children are not the problem. The system is the problem. The deprivation is the problem. Healing from this deprivation begins and happens when deaf adults get full access to ASL therapy. Emotional vocabulary is taught explicitly and clearly. Mentalization skills are strengthened in the community, and Codas get the recognition and the support for their role that they have in this situation. And when families learn conflict repair, and when shame is replaced with compassion, and when all children, including deaf children, have full access to rich language. Healing happens when we stop blaming individuals and we start addressing the injury. If you're deaf, you did not fail. You were failed. The system failed. If you're a Coda, you did not imagine it, even if nobody saw it or could name it. And if you work with the deaf community, interpreters, clinicians, educators, you have a responsibility to understand the truth and the devastation that the system has ignored for generations. We can't heal what we don't name. Language deprivation is not okay. Language access is a human right. There. We've named it. Let's commit to doing something about it. If this helped you, like and share, especially with families of deaf people, with deaf parents, with deaf people, Codas, clinicians, educators, and subscribe to this channel for more deaf-centered and trauma-informed content, because healing starts with information.